Hello and God bless with you again, Pastor Elizabeth. I just wanted to go over the continuation of the study, the names of God, and this is our new beginners seminary. And I want to bring together week 3 and week 4 because we're basically going to be going over all the compounds of Yahweh and its different definitions. And so they're just going to be brief explanations, but I always encourage you to just go back and do your own research, your own study. Go back on where the verses are and just go further into the story so that you can know them in a lot more detail, how these names came about. So I will always give the Bible verses. Remember to put me on pause, and then you yourself read the Bible verses at home and then press play again so that you can continue on. This way I can keep the studies as short as possible. So when we're speaking of these compounds, they are designations or titles which reveal additional facts about God's character because they derive from actual historical moments, whether it be in the history of Israel, his people, whether it be in the patriarchs when before his people had become a nation. So in all of these different times, he manifested himself in a different way. And so the first one that I want to talk about today is Yahweh Jireh, and most of the time you will hear it mentioned in the church as Jehovah Jireh. And so the spelling though of Yahweh, which is his name, his actual name is Yahweh, and Jireh is Jireh. Okay, and this means the Lord will provide. Okay, it stresses God's provision for his people. And the perfect example of this, and when it was first mentioned as Jehovah Jireh, was in the book of Genesis. You're going to read Genesis 22:14, and you can also read Psalms 68:7-10. And so in this particular story of God being the provider, it's when Abraham was sent out to sacrifice his son, and this was the son of the promise that he had been waiting for many, many years with his wife Sarah. Abraham was almost 100, Sarah 90, and it was a miracle to begin with that they were able to have this child, and they finally did, and then this child was asked to be sacrificed. And as he went on this 3-day journey, I'm sure that there was a lot of stress that was going through him during that time, but still he went in obedience, and he just said that the Lord would provide, and the Lord did provide. When he got to that mountain where he was supposed to make the sacrifices, the Lord provided for him so that he wouldn't have to sacrifice his son. The Lord told him, withhold from striking your son, Isaac, and at that moment the Lord provided a sacrifice so that Abraham can go forward and not cause harm to his own son, but be able to lift up an altar to the Lord right there. And at that moment is where the name Jireh, or the Lord will provide, that's where the name came from. And so it's a very interesting story. Please go back and read a little bit more so that you can hear the details of that. Yahweh Nisi is the Lord is my banner, and this was used a lot, was mainly during the time of war. Now, Israel was always in some kind of a war, or was being held captive, or there was always something going on during those times with battle, with war, especially during the times of Joshua and Moses. During that time, they were fleeing Egypt, and then they were going from land to land, and they would have to cross many territories that were not friendly. And so it was a time of war. Then when Joshua came into play, he had to conquer all the different lands that would then become the promised land, that would then become the nation of Israel. And so during this particular time in Exodus 17:8-16, the name Yahweh Nisi came about. Again, Yahweh, Yahweh, and Nisi is Nissi, which means the Lord is my banner. Okay, and for all of you who know or don't know, you know how when you have teams or bands playing in the street or different kind of performances, there's always a banner, right? There's always something that represents either your company, your team, your church, whatever it is that you're representing, that banner goes before you so that it can demonstrate, or it can represent more so who it is that you are with. And so Yahweh Nisi is the Lord is my banner. It stresses God, his rallying point, and it means that there's a means of victory that comes along with it. It's the one who fights for his people. Read Exodus 17:8-16. God delivers Israel from the Amalekites while in the wilderness. Remember, they didn't have their own land, so they were during that time like nomads, going from place to place once they came out of captivity from Egypt. And because they had to cross with tens of thousands, maybe even in the hundreds of thousands of people, it was more so in the hundreds of thousands of people. Can you imagine those multitudes crossing all these borders and lines? So they were bound to come into many enemy confrontations. And this particular one was with the Amalekites. And during these battles, God gave them their victory, and God presented himself as Yahweh Nisi, who always goes before his people and gives them the victory. So it's basically whoever goes before me. Yahweh Nisi, whoever goes before. He's the banner, just the way the banners go before whoever it is that you are representing, okay? You can also read Genesis 14:20 on that one. Let's move forward with Yahweh Shalom, which is Shalom, which means the Lord is my peace, okay? And it's again, during these times of war, in this particular one, when you read Judges 6:17-24, it's talking now about Gideon. Gideon was also a person that was during times of war, and even though they were against the Midianites during this time, and even though the Midianites had an enormous army, God was allowing them to presence shalom, which is peace. He was allowing them to presence just God's covering over them, just the sense of not being afraid, and just having this resting upon them. And it's just such an amazing thing that God can even do things like that and give them this sense of confidence to know that everything is going to be okay. So during this time with Gideon, he did present himself as Yahweh Shalom. Make sure you read the verses that go together with that. Yahweh Shabbat is the next one, which means the Lord of hosts. And I don't know if I spelled shalom for you all, but shalom is Shalom, and the next one that I just said is Yahweh Sabbaoth, which is the Lord of hosts. And it's kind of like more of a military figure, portraying the Lord as the commander of the armies of heaven. And an example of that is when David proclaims the Lord as the God of the armies of Israel, when they were being confronted with the Philistine army during the time, the story of David and Goliath, that he had to defeat that giant. And so that particular army that Goliath was in was the Philistine army. And God was presenting himself as the Lord of hosts. He was presenting himself as God of the armies of Israel, the one that was going to be with them, their captain, their rear guard, the one that was going to be their protector and their deliverer. And so that story, you can read it out of 1 Samuel 17:41-47. Again, I encourage you to go back on these stories. Don't just read the verses, so that you can understand all of this just a little bit further. But again, it means the Lord of hosts, which is again portraying him as a commander in the army of the Lord. Coming into now week 4, like I said, I wanted to consolidate all of them. Yahweh Makadeshem is the Lord is your sanctifier. Okay, that is spelled MACCADESHCEM. Okay, and the Lord is your sanctifier is what that means. And it portrays the Lord as our means of sanctification, or as the one who sets believers apart for his purpose. Now, this was done a lot, especially during the people who were set apart to be kings, the people who were set apart to be priests and Levites, the people who were set apart to be the ones who functioned in the temple and did the sacrifices, okay? It was just knowing God as the one who sanctifies, who makes one holy in efforts to do the call or do the job that he has ordained you to do. And the Shabbat was a means for this purpose. So this was, which is the Sabbath, which is translated as like Saturday, which was the day of rest in those times. It was consecrated in Jewish tradition, and it was a day where nothing can be done, absolutely nothing. It was a day of resting from the labor of the entire week in efforts to recognize God as the creator and as sovereign above everything. It was making sure people took that time to reverence him and let him know that he is God, and take the time to worship him, to go to the temple, take the time to just rest and admire all that he has done, and also the work of God's hands and all that he has provided. So during this time, it was celebrated on the Sabbath, which is Saturday, okay? Now, during grace, it's not really necessary for it to be Saturday, but it can be any day as long as you are, it can even be every day. It's a time to make sure that we are recognizing God in our life, that he is the sanctifier, that he is the one that can help us, cleanse us, help us to move forward to that next level. And so that's why it is important to remember that. Yahweh Makadashem, the Lord is your sanctifier, okay? He is the one that brings holiness into our daily lives as like a symbolic spiritual Sabbath in our lives. One day dedicated to seeking him. One day dedicated to congregating on his name, on his behalf, recognizing his majesty towards man. And, you know, most churches nowadays, organizations take Sunday to do it. But just remember to recognize him even in your daily life, okay? And if possible, try to come together and congregate at least once a week with your local church. You can read this out of Exodus 31, 12 to 17. Okay, we're going to move on to the next one, which is Yahweh Roi, which is spelled R-O''I. Okay, and this means the Lord is my shepherd. Okay, it portrays the Lord as the shepherd who cares for his people, as a shepherd cares for the sheep of his pasture. You can read a very popular verse that we all know, Psalm 23, 1 to 3. And a great example of this is 2 Samuel 5:3, okay? King David was the first to shepherd God's people, you know, and the second king. But he started all out first as a shepherd, and it was for animals. But he learned how to care so dearly and be protective of these animals. And I'm sure that at that moment he didn't understand why he had such a lowly job, but it was through caring for these animals and taking them out of the mouth of lions and bears and learning to protect them that then he became even more zealous for protecting God's people and doing it in such a diligent way, being one of the most amazing kings in history. And so the Lord is my shepherd shows that part of how you care for the sheep, which was back then physical. Today, we refer to it as the church of God, right? And the pastors are the shepherds, right? In the churches that are leading and guiding God's people. But the number one and only true shepherd that shepherds us always is God. He is our shepherd. He is our everything. Jesus Christ is the one who did it the best. He even came to the earth to prove himself to be the one and only awesome shepherd above all. And it's a very humbling position, the natural form of shepherding, but it just shows how he was able to humble himself that much so that you and I can have access to him and show himself as that awesome Yahweh Roi. Okay, and it's just so great to know that today we are spiritual Israel and he's still shepherding over us now. The next one is Yahweh Sidkinu, okay, and that one's spelled very difficultly. It's Tsidkenu. And this means the Lord our righteousness, okay? Zikinu, the Lord our righteousness, portrays the Lord as the means of our righteousness. Jeremiah 23, 5-6, and Psalm 98, 1-3. We know that he is the only one. Through that sacrifice, he has made us worthy, and his righteousness, his perfectness, his right standing, his way of doing things justly is what has given him the right to have this title of being Lord of our righteousness. It portrays just anything and everything that's good, that's right, that's perfect, with no error at all whatsoever. And Yahweh Shammah, which is the Lord is there, okay? The spelling of that is Shammah. And this is just awesome information, guys. And I hope that you continue to be a part of this and the Bible studies that will continue on. I didn't get to finish all of them, but we'll continue further out. I just didn't want to prolong this video too long. We just have 2 more to go, but we will continue it in the next week and bring it on to the following, okay? God bless you all, and hope to see you in our next study.